Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the stars. Each point of light was a world that no longer wanted humans. The message from the Galactic Council was clear. Humans had 72 hours to leave every planet in Council, space. All 200 million of them. The trouble started 6 months ago at Kepler Station. A group of alien slavers called the Zephyrians had come to take human children. They said it was legal under galactic law. The children were payment for debts their parents could not pay. Captain Roy Henderson and his Marines said no. They fought, the slavers, and won. They saved the children. The galaxy did not see it that way. The Galactic Council met in emergency session. Species after species stood up to condemn humanity. The Altarians called humans violent and unpredictable. The crystalline hierarchy said humans could not follow simple rules. The Vegan Confederation labeled humans as dangerous primitives who did not belong in civilized space. Morrison remembered watching the trial broadcasts. The human ambassador tried to explain. He talked about protecting innocent children. He spoke of basic right and wrong. The council did not want to hear it. To them, humans had broken galactic law. That was all that mattered. Amy Carter worked at the communication station next to Morrison. She monitored the message traffic flowing between human colonies. Every ship carried the same orders. Pack what you can carry, destroy what you cannot. Leave nothing behind for the aliens to use. The evacuation was chaos. Families ran through spaceports with whatever they could grab. Children cried as they left their pets behind. Parents tried to explain why they had to leave their homes. Nobody had good answers. Morrison watched the refugee ships gather. Cargo vessels packed with people instead of goods. Military ships carrying civilians instead of weapons. Even small private craft joined the convoy. Every human ship in the galaxy was running for the same place. The Outer Rim, the dark, empty space beyond galactic civilization. Captain Roy Henderson commanded the colony ship New Frontier. His ship carried 50,000 people from the agricultural world of New Texas. These were farmers and miners and small shop owners. They had never hurt anyone. Now they were criminals in the eyes of the galaxy. Henderson sent a message to all the human ships. His voice was calm, but his words were hard. He told them they were not running away. They were going somewhere new, somewhere they could build something better than what they were leaving behind. Dr. Lisa Park worked in the medical bay of the refugee ship Hope's Light. She treated people who were sick from the stress of leaving everything behind. Old people who might not survive the journey to wherever they were going. Young mothers who worried about feeding their babies in the cold dark of space. The worst part was the questions. Children asked why the galaxy hated humans so much. Adults wanted to know what they had done wrong. Park had no answers that made sense. How do you explain to a child that saving other children was considered a crime? The convoy reached the boundary of Council space after 2 weeks of hard travel. Morrison looked at his sensors. Behind them lay the warm light of civilized worlds. Ahead was nothing but empty darkness and distant stars that nobody had ever explored. Admiral Frank Cooper commanded the entire human fleet from his flagship Defiant. He was an old soldier who had fought in 3 different wars. He had seen humans, at their best and their worst. Now he had to lead them into the unknown. Cooper sent orders to every ship in the convoy. They would not split up and scatter to different systems. They would stay together, find worlds they could settle, build new homes, create new lives. The galaxy thought humans were dangerous. Maybe it was time to prove them right. The first ships crossed the boundary into the Outer Rim. There were no more navigation beacons, no more trade routes, no more safety nets if something went wrong. Just humans and whatever they could build with their own hands. Morrison felt something change in that moment. The fear was still there, the anger too. But underneath it all was something else, something that had always been part of humanity, but had been buried under years of trying to fit in with galactic society. It was the same thing that made humans explore dangerous places, the same thing that made them fight when others would surrender, the same thing that made them say no to the Zephyrian slavers. It was the refusal to give up, the stubborn insistence that some things were worth fighting for no matter the cost. The galaxy had tried to make humans civilized. They had tried to make them follow rules that said children could be sold to pay their parents' debts. They had tried to make humans accept that some things were just the way they were. The galaxy had failed. And now 200 million humans were heading into the dark with nothing but their ships and their anger, and their absolute refusal to be what others wanted them to be. Amy Carter picked up a transmission from one of the colony ships. A little girl was asking her father when they could go home. The father's answer was simple. They were going to build a new home, a better home, a place where humans could be human. The convoy disappeared into the darkness beyond the rim. The galaxy congratulated itself on removing a dangerous element from civilized space. The council members returned to their comfortable worlds and their orderly lives. They had solved the human problem. They had no idea what they had actually done. They had not destroyed humanity. They had freed it. 5 years had passed since the exile. The human settlement of New Haven was built on a world that tried to kill everything that lived on it. Acid storms came every few weeks. The local animals had too many teeth and not enough fear of humans. The ground was rich with minerals, but getting them out required going deeper than any sane person would dig. Danny Walsh led the mining crews down into the planet's core. The tunnels were hot and dangerous. Cave-ins happened every other day. The air was thick with dust that burned your lungs, but the metals they pulled from the ground were exactly what the human colonies needed to build ships and weapons and machines. Walsh had lost 3 fingers in a mining accident 2 years ago. He wore a mechanical hand now that he had built himself, from spare parts. It worked better than his old hand in many ways. Stronger grip, built-in tools, no nerve endings to feel pain when he grabbed red-hot metal with his bare fingers. His mining crews were all like that now, scarred and modified and harder than the rock they dug through. They used explosives that would make galactic engineers run screaming. They worked in conditions that would kill most alien species in minutes. They did it because someone had to, and there was nobody else to do it. Kate Murphy ran the engineering department for New Haven. Before the exile, she had been a junior technician on a council space station. She had followed galactic safety protocols and used approved materials and never took risks. Now she built defense systems that would terrify her old supervisors. The humans had no access to galactic technology anymore. No energy shields, no quantum processors, no gravity manipulators. They had to build everything from scratch using whatever materials they could find or make. Murphy's team created weapons that fired chunks of metal at incredibly high speeds. They built ships with thick armor plating instead of energy barriers. Everything was crude and brutal and effective. The first real test came when pirates attacked the New Haven supply convoy. 3 pirate ships dropped out of hyperspace near the convoy route. They were Corvan pirates flying fast attack ships with military-grade weapons. They expected to find easy targets. Soft human merchants who would surrender their cargo without a fight. Captain Alex Turner commanded the transport ship Spirit of Earth. His cargo hold was full of farming equipment and medical supplies bound for the outer colonies. His ship had no military weapons, no shields, no armor worth mentioning. The pirates should have been able to take him apart in minutes. Turner did something the pirates were not expecting. He accelerated toward them instead of running away. He opened his cargo bay doors and started dumping equipment into space. Tractors and plows and harvesting machines became an expanding cloud of metal debris between his ship and the pirates. The first pirate ship tried to fly through the debris field. The impacts tore holes in its hull and shattered its forward weapons. The second ship tried to go around, but Turner was already changing course to ram it. The Spirit of Earth was bigger and heavier than the pirate vessel. The collision destroyed both ships, but Turner's crew had time to reach the escape pods. The third pirate ship tried to retreat but ran into problems. More human ships were arriving. They were not warships, but they fought like they were. A mining vessel used its drilling laser to cut through the pirate's engine section. A passenger liner rammed the pirate ship's bridge. A small cargo hauler actually managed to capture the pirate vessel by using magnetic grapples designed for moving freight containers. Word of the battle reached other human settlements. The pirates had been dealt with, but not in any way the galaxy would consider civilized or proper. Humans had used civilian ships as weapons. They had turned cargo into ammunition. They had rammed their own vessels into enemy ships and called. iTactics.news also reached the core worlds. The Galactic Council received reports about human activities in the Outer Rim. The reports described brutal fighting methods and dangerous mining operations and settlements built on worlds that should not be habitable. The council members felt satisfied that they had made the right choice in exiling humanity. But more human settlements were being established every month. They chose the most dangerous and difficult locations. Asteroids with unstable orbits. Moons with poisonous atmospheres. Ice worlds where the temperature never rose above freezing. Places where other species would not even consider landing became thriving human communities. Each settlement developed its own character based on local conditions. The mining colonies produced people who were strong and tough and used to working with dangerous machinery. The asteroid communities created zero-gravity specialists who could fight in 3 dimensions. The ice worlds bred humans who never wasted anything and could survive on almost nothing. Ben Martinez was security chief for the mining world of Titan's Rest. His job was to protect the colony from hostile wildlife and equipment failures and the occasional pirate raid. He trained his security teams using methods that galactic peacekeepers would consider excessive. Live fire exercises, hand-to-hand combat practice, survival training in the worst conditions the planet could provide. Martinez had been a police officer on Earth before the exile. He had followed proper procedures and filled out paperwork and tried to solve problems through negotiation and compromise. That version of himself would not have survived a month on Titan's Rest. The Ben Martinez who existed now was harder and meaner, and absolutely willing to kill anyone who threatened his people. His security teams reflected that change. They carried weapons that were too big for galactic standards. They wore armor that was thick enough to stop high-powered projectiles. They trained in combat techniques that assumed the enemy would not follow any rules of civilized warfare. Because in the Outer Rim, there were no rules except the ones humans made for themselves. The human colonies were connected by supply ships and communication networks and shared determination to survive. They traded resources and information and personnel. A mining expert from one world might spend 6 months helping establish operations on another. A security specialist would travel between colonies sharing new defensive techniques. Most importantly, they were learning. Every attack taught them new ways to fight. Every equipment failure showed them how to build things better. Every natural disaster proved that humans could adapt to conditions that would destroy other species. The galaxy had cast them out, expecting them to fade away and die in the darkness. Instead, humanity was growing stronger, harder, more dangerous than they had ever been when they lived under galactic law and tried to follow galactic customs. The Outer Rim was forging them into something new, something the galaxy had never seen before and would not recognize when they met again. 10 years after the exile, the human mining world of Titan's Rest faced something that changed everything. Ben Martinez was doing his morning security check when the ground started shaking. At first, he thought it was another mining blast going off early. Danny Walsh's crews were always pushing their explosive charges to the limit, but the shaking did not stop. It got worse. Deep underground, something was moving. Something big. Martinez called up the geological survey team, but their equipment was showing readings that made no sense. The seismic activity was coming from everywhere at once, like the entire planet was waking up. The first Devourer construct broke through the surface near Mining Station 7. Martinez saw it on the security cameras and could not believe what he was looking at. It was a machine, but it moved like it was alive. Metal tentacles writhed through the air. Its body was covered in spinning blades and acid sprayers. It was consuming everything it touched and growing larger. Martinez grabbed his weapon and ran for the transport pad. He had 40 security officers scattered across the mining complex. Most of them had never seen anything more dangerous than a drunk miner or a territorial rock lizard. This thing was beyond their training and probably beyond their ability to handle. The Devourer construct reached the main mining facility before Martinez could get there. It tore through the reinforced walls like they were made of paper. The security teams opened fire with their heavy projectile weapons. The bullets bounced off its metallic hide or were absorbed into its body mass. The creature did not even slow down. Dr. Lisa Park was in the medical center when the emergency alarms started screaming. She could see the main mining facility through her window. Something was destroying it piece by piece. Workers were running in every direction. Some of them were not running fast enough. Park started preparing for casualties, but she quickly realized there might not be any wounded to treat. The machine creature was not just killing people, it was consuming them. Bodies and equipment and building materials all disappeared into its growing mass. Whatever this thing was, it did not leave survivors behind. Captain Nicole Barnes commanded the cargo ship Steel Rain. She was in orbit above Titan's Rest when the distress signal started. Her ship was loaded with farming equipment bound for another colony, but Barnes changed course immediately. She could see explosions and fires covering the surface of the mining world. Barnes opened her communication channels and reached Martinez. His voice was filled with static and the sound of weapons fire. The situation was bad and getting worse. The security teams were falling back to the main settlement. They needed immediate evacuation for the civilian population. The Steel Rain was not designed for passenger transport, but Barnes did not care about regulations anymore. She brought her ship down through the atmosphere while explosions lit up the ground below. The cargo bays were emptied and converted into passenger compartments. Every available space was prepared for refugees. Martinez coordinated the evacuation, while fighting a running battle against more devourer constructs. They were emerging from underground tunnels all over the mining complex. Each one was different, but they all shared the same hunger. They consumed metal and flesh and energy with equal efficiency. They grew larger and more complex as they fed. The human weapons were having some effect now that the security teams had learned to concentrate their fire. Heavy projectile rounds could damage the constructs if enough of them hit the same spot. Explosive charges could blow off tentacles and weapon appendages. But the creatures could repair themselves by consuming more material from their surroundings. Barnes made 6 trips between orbit and surface. Each time she landed, her ship was under attack from the devourer constructs. They seemed to recognize technology and actively sought it out. Her cargo bay doors were scarred from acid attacks. Her hull plating showed bite marks from mechanical jaws. But she kept flying. On the final evacuation run, Barnes found herself alone on the surface. The last group of refugees was trapped in the main settlement. The devourer constructs had surrounded the building. Martinez and his remaining security officers were making their last stand in the lobby. Barnes brought the Steel Rain down in a controlled crash landing. She put her ship between the trapped humans and the attacking constructs. Her cargo bay doors opened directly into the settlement building. The refugees ran straight from the lobby into her ship, while the devourers tried to tear through her hull. The Steel Rain lifted off with its hull glowing red from heat damage and atmospheric friction. More devourer constructs were emerging from the ground. They had consumed most of the mining complex and were starting to build something. A larger structure that pulsed with alien energy. Barnes did not stay to watch it grow. Most of the population of Titan's Rest had survived, but their world was lost. The refugees spread the word to other human colonies. Something was alive in the darkness beyond the rim. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. The human mining operations had awakened it, and now it was spreading. Communications specialist Rick Sullivan worked overtime trying to get a message through to the Galactic Council. The long-range transmitters were barely powerful enough to reach the core worlds. The message had to be relayed through several systems and translated into the formal diplomatic language the Council required. Sullivan's message was clear and urgent. An unknown hostile force had emerged in the outer rim. It was consuming worlds and growing stronger. It appeared to be heading toward civilized space. The human colonies were requesting immediate assistance from galactic military forces, the Galactics. Council received the message 3 weeks later. The response was swift and dismissive. Council records contained no evidence of any threat in the outer rim. The exiled humans were attempting to regain entry to civilized space through false alarm tactics. No credible danger existed beyond the boundary of Council territory. Admiral Helen Rodriguez read the Council's response with growing anger. She commanded the human defense fleet from her flagship Defiant. The ship was built entirely from materials, salvaged from the outer rim. Its weapons were crude but effective. Its armor was thick enough to stop almost anything. Its crew was made up of volunteers from every human colony. Rodriguez called a meeting of all human military commanders. They gathered in the Defiance conference room and looked at the tactical displays showing Devourer activity. The constructs had consumed 6 more worlds since Titan's rest. They were building a massive fleet of ships unlike anything in galactic databases. The pattern was clear. The Devourers were heading for the core worlds. They would consume the wealthy civilized planets just like they had consumed the human mining colonies. The difference was that the core worlds had billions of inhabitants and no experience with desperate survival. Rodriguez looked around the table at her officers. These were people who had been forged by 10 years of exile and hardship. They had learned to fight with whatever weapons they could build. They had learned to survive in conditions that would kill most other species. The galaxy had made them into exactly what it feared most. Now that same galaxy was about to face something far worse than humanity had ever been. The Devourers would not stop at exile or negotiation. They would consume everything and everyone until nothing was left but empty metal and death. Rodriguez made the decision that would change galactic history. Human ships would return to Council space not as refugees or supplicants, but as warriors. They would offer their help to the same aliens who had cast them out, and they would fight in the only way they knew how, without mercy, and without rules, and without any intention of losing. The Devourer swarm hit the outer core systems like a metal plague that consumed everything in its path. The first world to fall was Altarian Prime. It had been a peaceful trading hub for over 1,000 years. The planetary defenses were designed to stop pirates and smugglers. They lasted exactly 17 minutes against the Devourers. The Altarian defense fleet tried to evacuate the population, but the Devourer ships were faster and more numerous. They surrounded the transport vessels and consumed them whole. Passengers and crew and cargo all became raw material for more Devourer constructs. Within 6 hours, Altarian Prime was a dead world covered in metal processing facilities. The crystalline hierarchy tried a different approach when the Devourers reached their territory. They had the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Their ships used quantum weapons that could destroy matter at the molecular level. Their defensive systems created barriers in space-time itself. They were confident that their superior science would prevail. The Devourers studied the crystalline weapons for exactly 43 minutes. Then they began producing their own quantum disruptors and space-time manipulators. But the Devourer versions were crude and brutal, and somehow more effective than the elegant crystalline designs. The hierarchy's perfect geometric cities became raw material for more efficient processing plants. The Vegan Confederation had the largest military in the galaxy. Their war forms were living weapons bred specifically for combat. Each one was the size of a battleship and covered in organic armor and bioweapons. They had never been defeated in open battle. The Confederation fleet met the Devourers at the Beta Centauri system, expecting to demonstrate galactic superiority. The battle lasted 3 days. The Vegan war forms fought with courage and skill and determination. They destroyed hundreds of Devourer constructs. But for every enemy they killed, 2 more appeared. The Devourers consumed the wreckage of their own dead and rebuilt themselves stronger than before. By the end of the battle, the Confederation fleet no longer existed. The Galactic Council met in emergency session as the reports came in. 3 of the most powerful species in the galaxy had been defeated. Billions were dead. Entire star systems had been consumed. The Devourer fleet was growing larger and more sophisticated with every victory, and it was heading directly for the Core Worlds Council security forces tried to maintain order as panic spread through the capital. Ships filled with refugees fled toward the galaxy's rim, but there was nowhere to run. The Devourers were consuming worlds faster than the evacuation fleets could empty them. Soon there would be nothing left but machines and death. A message arrived from the darkness beyond the rim. It was transmitted on old human frequencies using human encryption. The words were simple, but they changed everything. Humanity offers assistance. The council chambers erupted in argument. Councillor Zelnari of the Vegan Confederation stood at his speaking platform. His species had just lost their home fleet, but his anger was directed at the humans instead of the Devourers. These barbarians were trying to exploit the crisis. They wanted to trade temporary help for permanent readmission to civilized space. But Councillor Thex of the Altarian Republic had seen the casualty reports. His people were dying by the billions. His worlds were being consumed and converted into enemy war machines. Perhaps it was time to reconsider what made a species civilized. Perhaps survival mattered more than following proper procedures. Debate continued for hours while more worlds fell to the Devourer swarm. Finally, Admiral Helena Voss of the Council Defense Force spoke up. She had been fighting a losing battle against the Devourers for weeks. Her fleets were being destroyed, faster than they could be replaced. If the humans thought they could help, then she was willing to listen. The message from Admiral Rodriguez was transmitted directly to the Council chambers. Her face appeared on the main viewing screen, looking older and harder than when the humans had been exiled. Her uniform was military, but not in any style the Council recognized. Her words were calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. She told them that human scout ships had been tracking the Devourer advance. The main force would reach the core worlds in 3 days. The human fleet could be there in 2 days, but they would not come as supplicants begging for readmission. They would come as allies fighting a common enemy, and they would fight using human methods. Commander Scott Williams led the first human strike force back into galactic space. His ships looked like nothing the Council had ever seen. They were angular and brutal with thick armor plating and weapons that fired solid projectiles instead of energy beams. They moved in formations that violated every principle of naval tactics, taught in galactic military academies. The human fleet reached the Beta Centauri system ahead of schedule. They found a Devourer harvesting operation, converting the remains of the Vegan warforms into raw materials. The sight would have horrified any civilized species. The humans saw it as a target-rich environment. Williams did not engage the Devourers in open space combat. Instead, he led his ships into the system's asteroid belt. The Devourers followed, expecting to trap the human vessels against the rocky debris. What they found was something no military computer could have predicted. The humans used the asteroids as weapons. Mining ships with heavy-duty tractor beams grabbed chunks of rock and hurled them at Devourer constructs. The impacts were devastating. Even the largest enemy ships could not withstand multi-ton rocks moving at orbital velocity. But that was just the beginning. Captain Tony Chen commanded the destroyer Iron Will. His ship had been built in the shipyards of New Haven using metals, pulled from hostile worlds by human miners. Every rivet and bolt had been placed by human hands. Every weapon had been tested in actual combat against pirates and predators, and the universe's attempt to kill humanity. Chen accelerated his ship toward the largest Devourer construct in the system. His crew thought he was planning a ramming attack. Instead, he used his ship's mining charges to break apart a nearby asteroid. The resulting debris cloud engulfed both ships. The Devourer construct tried to consume the rocky fragments but found they had been mixed with radioactive materials from human mining operations. The explosion destroyed the Devourer command ship and damaged a dozen smaller constructs. But the humans were not finished. Staff Sergeant Maria Lopez led a Marine assault team onto one of the disabled Devourer processors. They fought their way through mechanical defenders to reach the main power core. Instead of trying to shut it down, they overloaded it. The resulting chain reaction destroyed the entire Devourer harvesting operation. The human fleet withdrew before the explosions could reach them. They left behind a debris field that would take the Devourers months to process and rebuild. More importantly, they had proven something that the galaxy thought was impossible. The Devourers could be beaten, not through superior technology or brilliant strategy, but through sheer bloody-minded human stubbornness. The humans fought like they had nothing left to lose because in many ways they did not. They had already lost their homes and their place in galactic society. All they had left was each other, and their absolute refusal to give up. News of the victory spread through the remaining core worlds faster than official communications. The humans were back, and they were winning battles that the galaxy's finest military forces had lost. Species that had voted to exile humanity 10 years earlier were now begging for human protection. Rodriguez received dozens of requests for assistance. Every surviving world wanted human defenders. Every remaining fleet wanted human tactical advice. The same aliens who had called humans too dangerous for civilized space were now desperate for that danger to be pointed at their enemies instead of themselves. The tide of war was beginning to turn, but the cost was enormous. Human ships were being destroyed in every battle. Human crews were dying to save aliens who had rejected them. But they kept fighting, because that was what humans did. They protected the innocent even when the innocent had treated them badly. The final battle began at the edge of the Sol system, the same system where Earth had been before humanity was exiled to the darkness. The Devourers had consumed half the galaxy, and now they were moving toward the remaining core worlds. But first, they had to get past the combined human and galactic fleet that waited for them in the cold space between worlds. Admiral Rodriguez commanded the battle from her flagship Defiant. Around her were ships from every species that had voted to exile humanity 10 years ago. Altarian cruisers with their elegant curved hulls, crystalline vessels that looked like floating geometric sculptures. Even a few surviving Vegan warforms that had been rebuilt and rearmed with human weapons. The human ships looked crude and ugly compared to their galactic allies. They were covered in armor plating and bristling with kinetic weapons and missile launchers. They had been built in the orbital shipyards of New Haven and Titan's Rest and a dozen other human colonies. Every plate of metal had been shaped by human hands and welded by human engineers who understood that pretty ships died fast. Chief Engineer Kate Murphy watched her sensors as the Devourer fleet approached. There were thousands of enemy vessels. Each one was different because the Devourers adapted their designs based on what they had consumed. Ships built from Altarian technology moved alongside others, incorporating crystalline quantum systems. The largest constructs showed traces of vegan bioengineering twisted into mechanical nightmares. The Devourers had learned from every species they had consumed. They used the best features of galactic technology, combined with their own hunger for raw materials. Their ships were faster and stronger than anything the galaxy had ever built. They should have been unstoppable, but they had never fought humans before, and humans had spent 10 years learning how to break things that should have been unbreakable. The battle began when Captain Tony Chen led a squadron of human destroyers straight into the Devourer formation. The galactic commanders watched in horror as the small human ships accelerated towards certain destruction. Chen's vessels were outnumbered 100 to 1. They should have been vaporized in seconds. Instead, something impossible happened. The human ships scattered in all directions and started firing everything they had. Not at the Devourer vessels, but at the empty space around them. Missile warheads detonated in predetermined patterns. Kinetic projectiles created expanding clouds of metal debris. Within minutes, the entire battle area was filled with a chaotic mess of explosions and fragments. The Devourers tried to adapt to this new tactic, but found themselves facing something they had never encountered before: human unpredictability. Every time they calculated a response, the humans did something different, something that made no tactical sense but somehow worked anyway. Staff Sergeant Maria Lopez led boarding parties onto Devourer processing ships. Her Marines fought through corridors filled with mechanical defenders and acid traps. They planted explosive charges in the enemy ship's power cores. But instead of detonating them immediately, they set delayed timers and moved on to the next target. The explosions came in waves as dozens of Devourer ships destroyed themselves from the inside. The enemy fleet began to break apart as their command, and control systems were overwhelmed by the chaos. Ships collided with each other or fired on their own allies by mistake. Commander Scott Williams commanded a battle group of human heavy cruisers. His ships were slow and clumsy compared to the sleek Devourer vessels, but they were also incredibly tough. Williams used this to his advantage by flying directly into the enemy formation and accepting damage that would have destroyed any galactic vessel. His cruisers absorbed hits from quantum disruptors and molecular acid weapons. Their armor plating melted and their hull sections were torn away. But the ships kept fighting. Human damage control teams worked miracles keeping weapons and engines online. When main batteries failed, they switched to backup systems. When backup systems failed, they improvised new ones from spare parts and determination. Dr. Lisa Park commanded the hospital ship Mercy. Her vessel stayed at the edge of the battle, treating wounded from both sides. Human casualties were heavy, but they kept fighting despite injuries that would have incapacitated other species. Galactic allies learned to follow human tactical doctrine, even when it seemed insane. The turning point came when Chief Warrant Officer Kevin Turner figured out how to turn the Devourer's greatest strength against them. The enemy ships consumed everything they encountered to fuel their growth and adaptation. Turner realized this could be used as a weapon if they consumed the right materials. Human engineering teams prepared special cargo containers filled with radioactive waste and computer viruses and self-replicating nanobots programmed to disrupt mechanical systems. The containers were disguised as damaged ship components and left floating in space where the Devourers would find them. The enemy ships consumed the containers as expected. Within hours, their internal systems began to malfunction. The computer viruses spread through their networks, causing navigation errors and weapons failures. The radioactive materials poisoned their power cores. The nanobots reproduced rapidly and began dismantling critical components from the inside. The Devourer fleet began to collapse as ship after ship succumbed to internal sabotage. The survivors tried to retreat, but found themselves surrounded by human and galactic forces working together with deadly efficiency. The battle became a rout as the once invincible enemy fled toward the edge of the system. The last Devourer construct was destroyed by a joint task force led by Admiral Rodriguez herself. The massive enemy vessel had been built from the remains of a dozen conquered worlds. It carried the collected knowledge and technology of half the galaxy. Its destruction sent shockwaves through space that were felt on every remaining inhabited planet. The war was over. The galaxy was saved, but the cost had been enormous. Billions were dead. Entire species had been reduced to scattered survivors. Whole star systems would need decades to recover from Devourer consumption. The galaxy that emerged from the war would be very different from the one that had entered it. Admiral Rodriguez stood before the reconvened Galactic Council in the rebuilt chambers on New Geneva. Her uniform still showed scorch marks from the final battle. Her face carried the weight of commanding a war that had nearly destroyed civilized space, but her voice was steady as she addressed the assembled representatives. She told them that humanity had kept its word. The Devourers were defeated. The galaxy was safe. But things could not go back to the way they had been before. The war had proven that the old ways of thinking were inadequate for the threats that existed beyond the light of civilization. Humanity would accept reinstatement in galactic society, but not as subjects or junior partners. They would serve as guardians of the outer rim, protectors against the unknown dangers that lurked in the darkness between stars. They would be the sword and shield that stood between civilization and chaos. The vote was unanimous. Every surviving species agreed to the new arrangement. They had learned that sometimes civilization needed monsters to protect it, and if those monsters chose to be heroes, then the galaxy was fortunate indeed. The humans returned to their settlements beyond the rim, but now they were no longer exiles. They were the watchers in the dark, the guards at the edge of everything. They built new worlds and new fleets and trained new generations to fight against whatever horrors might emerge from the unknown. The galaxy was safer now, protected by warriors who had been forged in darkness and chose to serve in the light. They had been cast out as dangerous primitives. They had returned as the saviors of civilized space, and they would remain on watch for as long as the stars continued to shine.